The elevator doors opened on the 34th floor of Caldwell Group's Toronto headquarters. And Nora, no, wrong. Start over. Let me write this properly. The morning Penny Kowalski spilled an entire tray of coffee on the CEO of Caldwell Group, she had been employed for exactly 11 minutes. She hadn't meant to. That was the thing nobody would ever fully believe, no matter how many times she explained it. The tray was unstable. The carpet in the lobby had an edge that curled up slightly. A maintenance issue she would later discover had been reported 3 times and ignored 3 times. And when her heel caught it, the physics were simply unavoidable. 4 cups of dark roast, 1 glass of orange juice, the CEO's bone-white dress shirt. The lobby went silent the way lobbies only go silent when something truly spectacular has gone wrong. Grant Caldwell stood perfectly still. He was the kind of man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that stillness was more intimidating than anger. Tall, dark-suited, jaw set like it had been carved from the same granite as the building's exterior. He looked down at his shirt. He looked up at Penny. He said nothing for 4 full seconds, which felt, in that moment, like a geological era. "I'm so sorry," Penny said. "The carpet... There's a curl in the carpet right there. Someone should really... I'm sorry, that's not helpful. Do you have a change of clothes?" "Of course you have a change of clothes. I'm sorry." Grant Caldwell handed her the empty tray, turned and walked to the elevator. The receptionist, a polished woman named Andrea who had clearly witnessed many disasters in this lobby, leaned over her desk and whispered, "He fires people for being late. You should probably just leave now." Penny did not leave. She straightened her jacket, picked up the 2 cups that had somehow survived intact, set them on the tray, and walked to Andrea's desk. "Penelope Kowalski," she said. "I'm the new financial analyst in the audit department. Where do I sign in?" The truth was, Penny needed this job in a way that had nothing to do with ambition. She was 28 years old and had spent the last 3 years auditing mid-sized companies for a firm in Hamilton that had, 6 months ago, dissolved without warning or severance. She had a mother in Sudbury who called every Sunday and pretended not to worry. She had a younger brother in his 2nd year at Ryerson on a scholarship that covered tuition, but not rent, and Penny had been quietly covering the gap without telling him. She had $4,200 in her checking account and first and last month's rent due on her new apartment in 2 weeks. She had not, until the elevator carpet incident, considered that her employment at Caldwell Group might be conditional. She found out very quickly that it was conditional on many things. The audit department occupied the 22nd floor and was run by a department head named Victor, who wore the permanent expression of a man disappointed by everything, including the weather, which in Toronto in November was genuinely bad. Victor explained, on Penny's first morning, that the position she'd been hired for was technically a secondment. She would be assigned wherever the internal audit team needed her, which could include working directly with executive leadership. "Mr. Caldwell likes things a particular way," Victor said. "What way?" Penny asked. Victor looked at her the way people look at someone who has asked a question with an answer too vast to summarize. "His way," he said. "Just his way." Grant Caldwell did not think about the new analyst after the coffee incident. He thought about the Westfield acquisition, which was delayed. He thought about the board meeting on Thursday, which would require him to explain the delay without mentioning that his VP of Finance had given him projections built on 3 flawed assumptions. He thought about the fact that he hadn't slept more than 5 hours. In 11 days, a fact his sister Laura had pointed out over the phone in the tone she reserved for situations she considered his fault. He did not think about a curly-haired woman holding an empty coffee tray with the particular composure of someone determined not to cry. He thought about it once, briefly, at 2 a.m., when he was reviewing the Westfield files and his shirt still smelled faintly of dark roast despite having changed. Then he closed the file, opened it again, and kept working. What Grant was less willing to examine was why he hadn't fired her on the spot. He had fired people for less. He told himself it was because the lobby carpet was, in fact, a maintenance issue. He had noticed it before, and firing someone for a facility's failure would be technically unjust. He was not an unjust man. He was precise. There was a difference. He did not examine this reasoning very closely. The assignment came on Penny's 9th day. Victor called her into his office at 4 p.m. and explained that the Westfield acquisition audit had stalled because the acquisition itself had stalled, and Mr. Caldwell had requested a full independent review of the internal projections used to value the target company. The review needed to be done in 5 days. The team originally assigned had been pulled to a regulatory filing. "So it's just me?" Penny said. "And Mr. Caldwell," Victor said. "He'll be reviewing your work directly." Penny thought about her brother's rent. She thought about the $4,200. She said, "When do I start?" "You started 9 minutes ago," Victor said. "His office is on 34. Grant's assistant, a composed man named Thomas who had somehow survived 4 years in the role, showed Penny to the small boardroom adjacent to Grant's office and gave her access to a shared drive containing 12 folders and approximately 4,000 documents. "He'll review your preliminary findings at 9 tomorrow morning," Thomas said. "What preliminary findings?" Penny said. "I've had the files for 30 seconds. Thomas smiled the smile of someone who understood that the answer to this question was simply, all of them. Then he closed the door. Penny sat down, opened the drive, and started reading. She stayed until 11:47 p.m. She found, buried in the third folder of the Westfield projection model, a set of revenue assumptions that had been carried forward from a preliminary valuation done 18 months earlier, a valuation that predated a significant regulatory change in the sector. The assumptions hadn't been updated. Nobody had caught it. The entire projection was built on a number that was, conservatively, 14% too high. She wrote it up. Then she wrote up 2 other issues she'd found, smaller but not negligible. Then she went home, slept for 5 hours, and came back. Grant arrived at the boardroom at 9:04 a.m. He was rarely late and did not apologize for it. Penny had her findings printed and organized in a 1-page summary with supporting tabs. She had also, on the theory that this would be a long meeting, brought 2 coffees from the cafe downstairs. She placed one in front of the chair across from her. She did not mention the lobby. She did not apologize again. She just said, "I found 3 issues. The first one is the significant one." Grant sat down. He looked at the summary. He looked at it for longer than she expected. "You found this last night?" he said. "The regulatory change is from February of last year. The projections weren't updated. Whoever built the original model isn't necessarily at fault. The adjustment should have been caught in the review cycle." "Who did the review cycle?" he said. He already knew. He wanted to see if she'd hedged. She didn't hedge. "Your VP of Finance signed off on it in March." Grant was quiet for a moment. He picked up the coffee she'd brought. He didn't thank her. He said, "Walk me through the second issue." They spent 2.5 hours in that boardroom. Penny walked him through every finding, every supporting document, every implication. He asked questions that were sharp and specific and occasionally designed to see if she'd backpedal under pressure. She didn't backpedal. When she didn't know something, she said so, and told him where she'd look to find out. When she did know something, she said it plainly and didn't cushion it. At the end, he closed the folder and said, "This is good work." It was, Penny would later understand, approximately the highest praise Grant Caldwell gave anyone. It landed somewhere between extraordinary and adequate, and she chose to take it as the former. "There's a 4th issue," she said. "I didn't put it in the summary because I'm not certain yet, but there's something in the earn-out structure that looks wrong to me. Can I have 2 more days?" He looked at her. "You have one." She found it in 18 hours. She was right. It saved the company from a contingent liability that would have materialized 2 years into the post-acquisition period, costing approximately 8 times the purchase price premium they'd paid for the company. Thomas, when she submitted the final report, said quietly, "Well done." It was the most emotion she'd ever seen him express. Grant said nothing directly, but Victor called her that afternoon to say her secondment had been extended indefinitely and that she'd be working on 34. Working on 34 was not the same as working for Grant Caldwell. That distinction became important. The floor had a rhythm, she learned slowly. Grant arrived at 7:15 a.m. and left, most days between 8 and 10 p.m. He took meetings in concentrated blocks and did not like his schedule fragmented. He read everything himself before making a decision and had a particular distaste for summaries that omitted uncomfortable facts in the interest of palatability. He drank his coffee black and didn't bother with lunch on days when the calendar was bad. He was not warm. He wasn't cruel exactly. She'd seen cruel bosses, and Grant wasn't that. He was simply operating on a frequency where pleasantries used up bandwidth he'd allocated elsewhere. The people who'd worked with him longest had made their peace with this. The people who hadn't lasted long were the ones who'd taken it personally. Penny decided early not to take it personally. She was there to work. So was he. That was enough. What she had not accounted for was that working in proximity to someone for extended hours, under genuine pressure, tends to dissolve the careful professional distance people construct. It doesn't happen dramatically. It happens in small accretions. It happened in the moment, 3 weeks in, when she stayed past 9 p.m. to finish a risk matrix and found him still in his office, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, working in silence, and she knocked on the open door and said, "I'm done. Do you want to look at it now or tomorrow?" And he said, "Now," and they sat across from each other for 40 minutes, and he asked, at the end, whether she'd eaten dinner, and she said no, and he said, "There's food in the kitchen," and that was, somehow, inexplicably, the longest non-work conversation they'd had. It happened when she accidentally overheard him on the phone with his sister and caught, just briefly, before the door closed, a version of his voice that wasn't executive. That was just a man, tired, saying, "Laura, I'm fine. I just need everyone to stop asking me if I'm fine." It happened when he read a section of her analysis once and said, without looking up, "You went to school for this?" And she said, "No. I went to school for architecture." He looked up then. She said, "Long story," and he said, "Architects don't audit," and she said, "This one does," and something shifted slightly in the way he looked at her. Not much. Just slightly. The story she hadn't told him, hadn't told anyone at Caldwell, actually, was this. Her father had worked in construction. Not the kind of construction that intersects with architecture schools and design firms, but the kind with site work and subcontracts, and the particular financial precarity that comes from weather delays and municipal permit timelines that nobody can control. When she was 22, the year she finished her second year of architecture at the University of Waterloo, her father's company collapsed under a set of circumstances she still, to this day, found difficult to explain simply. The short version was, a larger contractor had defaulted on payment, which had created a cascade, which had ended with her father's business being absorbed into an insolvency proceeding. The longer version involved accounting irregularities she hadn't understood at the time, and had spent the subsequent years educating herself to understand. The even longer version involved the name of the company that had been the original defaulting contractor in that cascade. It was Caldwell Group's real estate division, a project from 12 years ago. She hadn't known, when she applied for the position, that the company she was joining was connected. Caldwell Group was large and diversified, and the construction division had been restructured twice since then. When she found out, 2 weeks after starting, she'd spent a weekend considering whether to leave. She hadn't left. Her father's situation had been, ultimately, one link in a long chain, and she couldn't prove that Caldwell Group had been specifically culpable versus simply one of many dominoes. And she needed the job. And the work was genuinely interesting. And, if she was being fully honest with herself, which she tried to be, she'd begun to suspect that Grant Caldwell, whatever else he was not the kind of man who would knowingly ruin a subcontractor and sleep fine afterward. She hadn't told him. She wasn't sure she ever would. It was a thing she carried quietly, like a stone in a coat pocket. You know it's there, you're used to the weight, you just don't put your hand in. The complication came in the form of a woman named Sylvia Marchetti. Sylvia was a VP at a competitor firm and had been for approximately 2 years before Penny arrived, the person Grant's mother called the one we hope he keeps. Grant's mother, Patricia Caldwell, was a formidable woman in her late 60s who attended charity functions in the way some people attended sporting events, competitively, with genuine investment in the outcome. She had decided, with the certainty she applied to most things, that Grant needed a partner who understood his world, and Sylvia understood his world in the way that people who operate in identical circles understand each other, fluently, without curiosity. What Patricia had not factored in was that Grant and Sylvia had, at some point in the preceding 6 months, quietly ended whatever had existed between them. Grant had not announced this. He'd simply stopped mentioning her name, and the people around him had adjusted accordingly, as they tended to with information Grant conveyed through omission, rather than statement. Patricia had not adjusted. This became Penny's problem on a Tuesday in December, when Patricia arrived unannounced on the 34th floor and found Penny in the boardroom with her son, both of them with their heads over a financial model, their jackets on the backs of their chairs, two half-eaten sandwiches from the lobby cafe pushed to the corner of the table. Patricia Caldwell looked at this scene with the particular attention of someone cataloging evidence. "Grant," she said from the doorway. "Mum," he said it without looking up. "I'm in the middle of something." Patricia looked at Penny. Penny looked at Patricia. Penny said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm Penelope Kowalski. I'm on the audit team." Patricia's expression did not change. "Are you here often?" she said. "Most days," Penny said. "We're in the middle of an acquisition review." Grant had by now looked up. He was watching his mother with an expression Penny couldn't read, watchful, slightly braced. "We'll be done in an hour," he said. "I'll come up." After Patricia left, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Penny said, because she was constitutionally unable to ignore things she'd noticed, "She thinks something's going on." "She's wrong," Grant said. "I know," Penny said. "I'm just noting it." "Nothing to note." "Okay," she said. She picked up her pen. "So the earn-out provision on page 47. He was quiet. Then, "She's been trying to get me back together with someone. It's not relevant." "I didn't ask," Penny said. "I know," he said. And that was the end of it. Except that it wasn't, quite. Because something about that exchange, the fact that he'd told her something he hadn't been asked, something small and personal, the kind of detail you volunteer to someone when you've started to think of them as, something had shifted a degree further. The crisis, when it came from an unexpected direction. A journalist named Kevin Marsh, who wrote a financial column for a national paper, had obtained information. Penny never found out how, about the Westfield acquisition talks, and had produced a story implying that Caldwell Group was paying a significant premium for a company with known financial irregularities. The story was not accurate. It was based on an early valuation document, not the corrected one. But it landed on a Friday morning, and by 10 a.m. the stock had moved, and 3 board members had called. Grant spent the morning on calls. Penny spent the morning preparing a fact sheet that laid out, clearly and in plain language, what the original projections had shown, what she'd found and corrected, and what the revised valuation actually said. She worked fast and she worked accurately, and when he came out of his 4th call and walked into the boardroom, and she handed him 4 pages and said, "Everything the journalist used was pre-correction. The corrected model tells a different story, and here it is, sourced and formatted." He read all 4 pages standing up, without sitting down. He looked at her. "How long did this take you?" 90 minutes, she said. "I started when I saw the article. You started before I asked you to. It needed to be done," she said. "I didn't think you'd object." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's good. Thomas, send this to the board." He turned back to his office and then paused in the doorway. He didn't turn around. He said, "Kowalski." "Yes," she said. "Thank you." It was, she realized later, the first time he'd said it. Not the work is good, not the findings are solid. "Thank you." She sat with that for a moment after he'd gone in, and then she went back to work, because that's what they both did, and it was, for now, enough. She told him about her father in February, by accident. They were working late. They worked late often now, and had stopped making note of it, and she'd been reviewing historical project files from a Caldwell real estate division acquisition when she came across the name of a company she recognized. Her pen stopped moving. She sat very still for a moment. He must have noticed, from across the table. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. And then, "Actually, no, it's not nothing," she told him, quietly, without drama. She told him about her father's company, about the collapse, about the cascade, about the name at the top of it. She told him she'd found out 2 weeks after starting, and had considered leaving and hadn't. She told him she didn't think Caldwell Group had been specifically culpable. It was a large company. It was 12 years ago. It was complicated. But she wanted him to know, because she'd been sitting on it for months, and it was starting to feel like a weight she was carrying that he had a right to know about. When she finished, the room was quiet. Grant said, "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I just found his company name in a file," she said, "and it stopped me. And you noticed." He was quiet for longer this time. Then he said, "My father ran the real estate division 12 years ago. He died in 2019. I took over in 2020, and I spent the first year doing exactly what you've been doing, finding the things that had been structured badly and hadn't been caught." He paused. "I can't fix what happened 12 years ago. I can't make that right. But he stopped, started again. I'm sorry about your father's company. Penny nodded once. She looked down at the file. She said, he built houses for 30 years. He was good at it. I know, Grant said. And something about the way he said it, simply, without qualification, made her believe him. The thing about walls is that they don't come down all at once. They come down in installments. A brick here, a gap there. You don't always notice until you're standing in a place with much more sky than you remember, wondering when exactly that happened. Grant noticed it on an evening in March when Penny had left for the day and the floor felt quieter than it usually did. Not less active, not less busy, just quieter in a specific way that had to do with her absence rather than the hour. He was on his way out of the boardroom when he walked past her desk and saw a small framed photograph she'd put there recently. Her brother at his university convocation, grinning in a rented gown, and Penny beside him, laughing at something off camera. He stood and looked at it for a moment longer than made sense. Then he kept walking. He got to the elevator. The doors opened. He pressed the button for the lobby. And then, standing in the elevator on the way down, he thought, this is a problem, not a professional problem. The professional situation was clear. She worked for him. That was a complication. The other problem, the actual problem, the one that was considerably less convenient, was that somewhere between the coffee tray and the Westfield files and February's conversation, and all the late evenings and the particular way she said, I didn't think you'd object, and the photograph of her laughing, he had stopped thinking about her as his analyst and started thinking about her as Penny, and that was a line he had not intended to cross and had not noticed crossing until he was already on the other side of it. He went home. He did not sleep well. He said nothing for 2 weeks. He was very good at saying nothing when he'd decided to. What broke it open was not a grand gesture. It was a Tuesday morning. Penny came in, put her bag down, opened her laptop, looked up and said, You've been weird for 2 weeks. What's wrong? He looked at her. I haven't been weird. You've been polite, she said. You're never polite to me unless something's wrong. He almost laughed. He didn't. He said, I've been thinking about something. About the Brennan file? No. She waited. About, he said, and then stopped, which was unlike him. Grant Caldwell did not often stop mid-sentence. About the situation here. About what's appropriate. Penny looked at him for a moment. She was perceptive. She'd always been perceptive, and he watched her put it together, the way she put everything together, quickly and without fuss. Her expression didn't change dramatically. Something in it settled, like a room when the windows are finally opened. Ah, she said. It's not something I'm going to act on, he said. I want to be clear about that. You work here. I know, she said. I just thought you should know. Because you noticed something was different and you'd have figured it out anyway. Yes, she said, I would have. She looked at her laptop. She looked back at him. For what it's worth, she said. I've been thinking about it too. He was quiet. I'm not going to make it weird, she said. We both have work to do. Yes, he said. They went to work. What happened next happened slowly, and then all at once, the way most things do. Penny resigned from Caldwell Group in April. She gave 4 weeks' notice, finished every project she was on to a point of clean handover, and wrote Victor a professional and thorough transition memo. Her reason, on the official form, was a new opportunity. The new opportunity was real, a senior audit position at a firm in Mississauga that she'd been approached about. And that was, objectively, the right next step. She did not see Grant before she left. She had decided this was cleaner. He called her on her last Friday at 6:30 p.m. She was packing the last things from her desk when her phone rang. She answered. He said, I heard you're done today. Yes, she said. I didn't say goodbye, he said. No. That was. A pause. That was a failure of courtesy on my part. It's all right, she said. It's not, actually. Another pause, and she had known him long enough by now to understand that these pauses weren't empty, that he was using them the way other people used words. I wanted to say that working with you has been, the best work I've done in a long time has been the work we did together. I want you to know that. Penny sat down on the edge of the desk. The floor was empty. The city outside was turning the particular gold it turns in late afternoon in spring. She said, I want you to know that too, the other thing, he said. Yes? I would like to have dinner with you. This isn't about work. There's no appropriate professional reason for this call. He stopped. Started again. I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner with me. There was a silence. Grant Caldwell, Penny said slowly. Are you nervous right now? No, he said. You are, she said. You stumbled on 3 sentences. You never stumble. I don't stumble, he said with dignity. You stumbled, she said, and she was smiling now, and she didn't try to hide it because he couldn't see her, and also because, actually, she would have let him hear it regardless. Yes, she said. I would like to have dinner. They had dinner on a Saturday in early May at a small restaurant in the distillery district that was neither flashy nor trying to be, which Penny appreciated, and which told her something about the thought he'd put into the choice. They talked for 3.5 hours, about her father and her brother and the year she dropped architecture, about his father in the real estate division and the year he took over and found the mess, about Laura, who called too often and was usually right, about the subway carpet in the Caldwell lobby, which he admitted he had reported to facilities that same morning. You reported it that morning? She said. It was a hazard, he said. You reported it that morning, she said, and didn't mention it when it was directly relevant to your new analyst spilling coffee on you. He looked at her. I noted that it was a facilities issue, he said, and not attributable to employee negligence. She stared at him. So you didn't fire me because of the carpet? I didn't fire you because of the carpet, he confirmed. That's, she laughed. It came out genuine and unguarded, and he watched it happen with an expression she was getting better at reading. That is the least romantic version of events that is somehow still a little bit romantic, she said. I don't do romantic, he said. You drove 40 minutes to a restaurant in the distillery district on a Saturday night, she said. You do romantic. He didn't argue. He flagged the server for the bill. Under the table, his hand found hers briefly, in the particular way of someone who has decided and is done being careful about it. Penny's brother Thomas met Grant Caldwell in June at a family dinner that Penny's mother hosted in Sudbury. A 6-hour drive that Grant made without complaint, which Penny's mother, whose name was Barbara and who had strong opinions about effort, clocked immediately and approved of without reservation. Thomas spent most of dinner testing him with questions that got progressively less subtle, and Grant answered every one of them directly, which Thomas later admitted to Penny was more disarming than he'd expected. He's kind of intense, Thomas said. Yes, Penny said. But he drove 6 hours, Thomas said. Yes, she said. Okay, said Thomas, which was, from Thomas, full endorsement. Grant proposed in October on a Thursday evening, which Penny later described as quintessentially him. Not a weekend, not a special occasion, a Thursday, because they were walking home from dinner, and it was a clear night, and the leaves on the street were that particular burnt orange color that Toronto does better than almost anywhere. And he simply stopped walking and said, I want to marry you. And when she turned around, the ring was already in his hand and she understood, in the way she'd come to understand him, in installments, in the small things more than the large, that he'd been carrying it for a while, waiting for the right moment, and had decided that this was it not because it was exceptional, but because it was simply them. Ordinary evening, good light, both of them exactly where they were. She said yes. Obviously she said yes. She also said, You planned this for a Thursday? Thursday seemed right, he said. You're impossible, she said. You knew that, he said. You stayed anyway. She had. She had stayed through the politeness that meant something was wrong, and the silences that meant something was right, and the late evenings in the boardroom and the 4 pages of sourced fact sheets and the subway carpet and the conversation about her father and all the small installments of a man she'd watched choose, one brick at a time, to come down. She had stayed, and here they were, on a Thursday in October, with burnt orange leaves and a ring that fit perfectly, which she suspected he had verified somehow without her knowing, because he was precise, and precise people check their measurements. She put it on and they kept walking. The city did its city thing around them, indifferent and bright, and it was just a Thursday, and it was exactly enough.